Hello, and welcome to The Hill is Always Greener, a show where four friends have chill discussions about Sonic the Hedgehog to distract themselves from the inevitable passage of time and their own rapidly waning ability to relate to the youth. Or something like that. I am Game Buddy.
I am Valero.
I'm Rock the Jake.
And I'm Cyberlink.
Well, today I think we're just going to jump straight into our topic today, because we are discussing...
Which is very difficult because it is high up in the sky and I can't jump that high.
Yes, it's a big object, it's a big topic, and, well, we're talking...
It's a big egg.
Yes.
Yeah, someone was going to say it.
It's got a big face.
We're allowed to do that on this one.
It is a big egg.
Yeah, especially in some artistic renderings. We are talking about the Death Egg. I'm just going to throw it over to you, Valero.
Hi, this was my idea to do this episode, so I get to lead it. I'm weirdly passionate about this big egg. So here we are on May the 5th. So May the 5th be with you.
Revenge of the 5th.
Yeah, Revenge of the 5th. And we're talking about something that is Star Wars adjacent, which is to say it's just a big rip-off of the Death Star from Star Trek. Star Wars! Oh no!
Oh no!
They're gonna get you.
Oh, my nerd license.
We're not cutting that out. You're gonna own that one.
That's gonna live with me for the rest of the time. But also, am I really in danger of just upsetting nerds? We're all nerds here.
Yes.
Oh, well, anyway. So, the Death Egg. The reason we wanted to talk about this is because if we were just, like, maybe about 10 or so years ago, this would have been like, it was in one game and a few comics, and that was great. But yeah, the Death Egg is a recurring element in Sonic games now, surprising to say. God, I just really find it fascinating. You'd think it's the silliest thing. This big giant egg in space. You'd think, like, with Robotnik's face on it, you'd think this is the weirdest, silliest thing. It is, but it's also really scary. Trust me, as someone who grew up fearing it. But yes, this is the Death Egg episode, and what can we say about the Death Egg?
That it is surprisingly a pop culture reference that has permeated Sonic since the very beginning, and nobody bats an eye at it, which is really weird to me.
Yeah?
Yeah, I can't really pin it down. I'm pretty sure I saw the Death Egg before I saw the original Star Wars. Now, I'm sure, again, because it was such a ubiquitous pop culture thing, even, back in the early 90s, that I probably knew what the Death Star was, even though I hadn't seen, the original trilogy yet. But when I saw it in Sonic, it was just like wow, that's a cool thing. I think it's a Star Wars. I'm not sure yet. I ain't.
See, I wasn't one of those people that really grew up with Star Wars. I knew it was there, and I sort of, like, briefly acknowledged the Death Star. I knew what it looked like, but I don't know. The Death Egg was, like, Sonic was one of the first things I really cared about in the world. So that's where, so I'm like, oh, Death Star, yeah, nice Robotnik ripoff there, George Lucas.
I remember as a kid thinking, and hey, it was kind of vindicated by the time we got to arguably the progenitor in fiction of the Death Egg Space Colony arc, that the Death Egg, I don't think in any games ever fired any, like, giant planet-destroying lasers. It just kind of faffed about and kind of fell out of the sky in most of the games, huh?
Yeah, we don't actually see it doing a whole lot, but it mentions it has weapons. I feel like I probably should have checked Sonic Forces a bit more thoroughly, because they actually use that in as a weapon in that game. But yeah, it's just kind of there, isn't it?
It sure is still cool looking, though.
I myself grew up occasionally watching, like, the original trilogy Star Wars on VHS with a friend whenever I would, like, spend the night at his place. Like, we would stay up late and watch, like, just any of the original three. And I think there was only, like, one time when I was a kid where, like, I saw the Death Egg and I was just like, hey, that's just like Star Wars. And then, like, after that I just saw it as, like, two separate things.
Yeah.
but like, I think the Death Egg, honestly, the Death Star is, like, such a huge pop culture thing, and it's been, referenced and parodied so many times. But I would say, like, the Death Egg almost has, like, a shoulder-to-shoulder position with it because it's also been in like the public conscious, as far as at least like video gamers and stuff, for a really long time. And it kind of has more personality because if you think about it, the Death Star is pretty much just a big marble where Layla gets captured. Not Leia. People fight sometimes and then it blows up twice. Whereas, whereas the Death Egg, the Death Egg also has lasers. It has a big face and it pops up a lot more frequently in its own canon than the Death Star does.
That is true. I don't know if I could say it was shoulder to shoulder with the Death Star because I think a lot more people know about Star Trek. Oh, it nearly happened again! More people know about Star Wars than Sonic the Hedgehog, I think, in general. But as far as we nerds are concerned, I don't know. Like, in the nerd subculture, I don't know, man. Sonic's making a bit of a resurgence now.
In our particular niche.
I definitely saw the Death Star first, but I played Sonic 2 first. I just never got far enough in that to, see the Death Egg. I wouldn't have picked up on it at that time.
Sonic 2 is interesting, and we'll go into more detail in that it kind of appears in name only. Like you don't ever get like an outside shot of like, oh, this is a space station being built in progress. You kind of just get the little transition of Sonic hopping off the rocket and then the Death Egg zone.
Yeah, you don't actually see what it looks like unless you're a sneaky little cheater person who goes onto the level select to see the outside, and you'll see like the icon for the level. It's a big egg with a Robotnik's face on it. But otherwise, if you actually play the game normally, like a good kid, you would never know what the Death Egg looks like in that time period.
You're a good boy. You don't know Yuji Naka's birthday to enter on that sound test.
But I'm looking at a picture of the Death Star right now, and there's like that big circular point. I think that's what the actual weapon comes from. The big cannon comes from that little indent, the circular indent. Yeah. You can sort of see how it's sort of like copy-paste one to the other side to make an eye, and then put a mustache and nose in the middle, and you've got the Death Egg. But I don't know. I think that's scarier to me, is Robotnik's big face plastered on it.
Yes, Jake was saying, like, that adds so much personality to not only the Death Egg itself, but to the character of Dr. Robotnik / Dr. Eggman that... he had you will see his cute little logo on stuff but I mean, this is the ultimate, like, yes, my face large enough to see over the horizon. My mightiest creation.
I think there is something to be said about if you saw the Death Star coming from miles, I guess maybe light years, space travel is weird, away. That would be like very imposing and scary.
That's no moon.
But like, even with as goofy as Eggman's face is, if you saw the same thing but with his face on it coming at you, I don't know. Like, as humans, we're drawn to faces. That's why, for instance, so many YouTube thumbnails usually have people making stupid faces in them, and that's why we tend to see faces in things like the Man in the Moon or what we see in cloud images. And so I think if there's an imposing force coming at us that looks like it has some sort of face, it would probably be scarier. I think a prime example is the moon from Majora's Mask.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe it's just because I just saw that clip again, but the scene from Gravity Falls where the giant balloon shaped like Grunkle Stan's face catches on fire and falls towards the children.
Eat kids!
Mommy, is the floating head going to eat us? Yes, Charlie! Yes, he will!
I think you're right on the money there, Jake.
Yeah.
An identifiably human feature, but giant planetoid sized. It makes it all the scarier.
So I have a question to posit to our Death Egg host for the day, Chris.
Hi.
And this is a very real, genuine question. Do we know who had the initial thought about the Death Egg? Like, if it was an artist or if it was Yuji Naka himself? Do we have any documentation on that?
If we do, I've not properly researched it.
It's interesting because, you have in our outline here a chronological appearance of the Death Egg, and the one that blew me away is this commercial for Sonic the Hedgehog 1. Mm-hmm. That sure as hell looks like it has a Death Egg in it.
Yep.
Yeah, the Japanese animated commercial for Sonic 1 that features Sonic in various cool heroic situations, include riding on a spaceship, like in that one arcade game. What's it called again?
Sega Sonic Cosmo Fighter.
Yes.
Yeah, Sega Sonic Cosmo Fighter, Sonic He-Man game.
You know, that one.
You've done a good job keeping space peaceful.
Yes, exactly. He like that. He's in a little spaceship and he's going after what looks like the Death Egg, just with a very prominent moustache. And I'm pretty sure this is just more or less the idea of what's a cool Hollywood situation where you put Sonic in, blowing up the Death Star, but it's got Robotnik's face on it. I guess they had the same idea as the Sonic 2 creators.
Yeah, that is super interesting. I wonder, I really do wonder which came first, or was it one of those, what do you call it, parallel thinking, like they both just came up with the idea for the Death Star, Death Egg at the same time?
Yeah, which came first, the egg or the egg?
Yeah. That was one of the commercials that got included in the movie theater in Sonic Jam, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah. But yep, that sure is. It is a little different from the traditional Death Egg, but I think it counts for sure.
I think I would not be surprised if they saw that in the commercial and they thought, and then one thing led to another.
Glad I thought of it.
I mean,
you made this? I made this.
I mean, when you consider, like, we don't know for sure who came up with the Death Egg, but it was in a Yuji Naka helmed game, and Yuji Naka, he's a guy known for things.
One of those to where even if in a cursory glance, I do not see any like credited concepts for that. But yeah, even if we did have a statement, say, from Mr. Naka, I don't know if I'd trust it at this point.
Yeah,
true.
Just all things considered in the year 2023 regarding the legacy of Yuji Naka. But hey,
I will say Sonic 2 was like co-made in America, largely made in America actually, even though Yuji Naka helmed it. And having a bunch of Americans coming up with level designs, one was like, what if we do Star Wars? That entirely could have been what happened.
That would have been back then where all nerds had to sound like that, so you could.
We're gonna find one of these days. We're gonna find out that Mark Cerny was a big closet Star Wars geek.
Yeah, he might be the one. He might be the one to ask in these days.
But that kind of leads us to Sonic 2, I think. The first actual legitimate appearance of something called the Death Egg. And as we mentioned before, that's like, yeah, you don't actually see anything you don't see it from the outside unless you're on the level select. But you do get to see, like, the planet. I guess it's the planet Earth, really. I was going to say Mobius because that's just what I thought it was. I read the comics.
I mean, that was what we were led to believe at the time. I have no reason to, I'm not going to decry you for saying so.
But how cool is that at the time, though? For me, like, seeing the planet down there, like, through the viewpoint of this big old space station, that's quite awe-inspiring.
Yeah.
And then you it's basically a little mini boss rush where you fight. First off, like one of the recurring things I think in Death Eggs is we fight a big old robot Sonic, the Mecha Sonic that I don't remember the number of. Is it number 2? We called him Silver Sonic back in the day anyway, but no, that's no longer relevant apparently.
He's back to Mecha Sonic as far as I know. I know in LEGO Dimensions they called him Robo Sonic just because they also had Mecha Sonic as we know him, and they didn't want to get him confused.
I still think Silver Sonic's pretty cool.
I mean, it's like a good name, isn't it?
Yeah.
I don't hate it.
He's the big brother of the 8-bit version.
Mecha Sonic the Hedgehog 2, do they have a name for it? Well, it's just a big, scary freaking robot that you fight. You've got no rings, and that gave me nightmares when I was going to say, when I played through all of Sonic 2 to fight to go against him, but no, I knew the level select back then. I just wanted to jump to the last level to look at it. I was like, oh my god, what happened? Why am I in space?
Yes, I think that was my first experience as well. And also the like, oh no, I must have glitched something because there's no rings. You have to give me some rings, right?
No.
No.
Nope.
It is interesting that Okay, even, this is the Death Egg zone, and even, like you said, you don't actually see the Death Egg proper, but the lasting legacy in Sonic 2 is the big old Death Egg robot, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the most recurring element, I think, inside the Death Egg.
I think in recent years, it keeps coming back mostly just because they already have the model made. They could just keep, using it again. Mm-hmm. But I think that, putting that aside, it is still like one of the more iconic parts of that whole sequence.
And if you needed character motivation, we've already established that Eggman loves his appearance enough where he puts on a giant orbital egg. So yes. You could say like even if this machine doesn't work every time, I still love it.
Yep. And his giant mech suit as well just looks like him.
Of course it does. And
yep.
Kind of terrifying when I played it originally. Because again, no rings, giant, just this big old stompy mech coming after you, chucking its spiky arms at you. Horrifying horns blaring in the background as you fight against it.
Arguably unfair hitboxes on that thing.
Yeah.
And if you're playing as Knuckles, you're screwed because you can't jump high enough to get him until he's like bending down.
Oh man.
Oh man. Yeah, even I remember doing that in Origins. And it's like, nope, this is still really hard.
Yep.
You can get some cheap hits in with Sonic, but prepare to do the entire, 10 cycles with Knuckles? Ugh, boy. Scary robot.
There's just something about it, like when you finally beat it and it starts blowing up, and then everything blowing up when you blow it up, and then Sonic's running out and there's explosions everywhere, and... Look at Tails and his friends.
Dreams come true kicks in.
Why did I tie the core functions of this Death Egg to this one robot?
I didn't know it was a load-bearing robot.
It keeps happening.
It keeps happening.
So it was like the first glimpse of like, wow, this is really scary. Really cool and like really climactic, and what a great ending to the game, but oh man, like just immediately when I think of originally when I would think of the Death Egg, I'd think of that level, that stressful level, which I would get game overs on over and over again, because it's really hard fighting both of those bosses straight in a row. But yeah, that's it. It's just fear. That's my first point of where I'm like, I associate the Death Egg with fear, and I hadn't even seen the giant face yet.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's less witness the full power of this fully operational battle station, more we're just going to make things as unfair to you as possible. The station is irrelevant. You just can't take any hits.
Yeah, but I think the Death Egg finally comes into like its true glory by the time you get to Sonic 3 and Knuckles. Now, of course, like, because this is like the Death Egg saga essentially starts in Sonic 2 and it becomes like this big old story point throughout the next couple of games and like the final games of the original Mega Drive Genesis trilogy. And Sonic 3 is like where the whole point of the game, aside from, it's all happening on Angel Island and you're fighting against Knuckles. Robotnik's trying to bring back the Death Egg because it's fallen down, it's landed on the island, now he's trying to bring it back and you've got to stop it. And that's like, even if you don't necessarily see that until you get to like Launch Base Zone, where you see the head like slightly submerged in the water in the background,
looming.
The threat, if you've read like the book, it's like, you've got to stop this thing because you know what it did last time. It made you fight 2 bosses in a row, and that was really horrible. You don't, again, like in this game, you don't see it a whole lot. In fact, you don't, like in Sonic 3, like vanilla, you're going, you're like riding on the underside of it as it starts to launch off. You fight against Robotnik in 2 very horrible battles, actually, without even getting into the Death Egg. And then when you beat it, you just see it sort of like fall in the distance. You're like, oh, there it goes. Oh, it's exploded. Hooray, we won.
I do have, like, we're talking about vivid sense memories of that, the little sequence after the boss in Launch Base Act 2. You hop into the little abandoned Eggomatic, and then you get the I've always loved that scene with Knuckles where he's like, he kind of is like, everything's coming up, Knuckles. Nothing could possibly go wrong. And then the Death Egg starts launching, and, I know my memories are, playing on my little CRT CRT TV with my Genesis hooked up, I swear the feeling of the Death Egg's jet boosters launching like shook my entire house. Just like, Sonic's just passing in front of them and it takes up the whole screen. Oh, it's so good. And you make it to that little outcrop and get to fight the, I know it has an official name. I never noted, I never learned it, the little mini boss, because everybody just remembers Big Arms.
Yeah, it might not be there if you're playing on the original Sonic 3 and Knuckles, but in Origins and most other fan mods, they knew that you had to have that there.
Yes, I do. A special shout out to, I love the little, the special bridging the games animation in Sonic Origins that is like the Sonic and Knuckles intro screen with the Death Egg falling into the mountain. I love that.
Yeah.
I think that kind of brings us to Sonic and Knuckles, because that's like the first thing you see on the title screen is the Death Egg falling face first into the volcano with a and
yeah, I think that would have been my and probably a lot of other people's first real kind of realization of, oh, that is what the Death Egg looks like. Oh, okay.
It's so funny. I think the game, the presentation in those games does such a good job of, it is like you can riff and like talk about how funny it is that like Eggman just can't get this freaking thing launched, huh? But like thinking back, I remember thinking like, like, oh, well, thank goodness, gosh, that, okay, Sonic did it, it crashed into the island, but it didn't launch, because it's like, if this thing like gets fully powered up and gets launched, it's over. Like when that actually happens in at the end of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, I remember as a child just having like, we gotta stop him here. We can't let him get away.
We don't know why. We don't know what it's going to do. But the very idea of it being up there, it can't be good.
Yes, exactly. I remember being fully bought into the very thin fiction. Again, we don't actually know what it can do in the context of these games, but it's very bad.
It's like we've all seen Star Wars. We're like, oh no, it's probably got a giant laser built up to it. He could probably wipe out half the moon with that. Maybe that's a stretch.
And it's more like just his summer getaway up in the sky.
Oh, we're ruining that for him. Oh well.
I know. What if that was it? What if he just wouldn't know? As we're fixing to get into, the many Death Eggs are proactively bad machines that affect the the
I'm sure he told Knuckles that it's like, oh yeah, I'm just going up there to my little summer home in space. It's going to be fine. Well, if you say so.
Definitely won't crash your island, steal your emeralds, or eat the little planet. Is that still canon? We'll get to that.
I feel like Sonic and Knuckles in particular is where like the narrative, like it may not be like a deep narrative, but you see a lot of stuff happen through like the environmental storytelling and the little mini cutscenes in Sonic and Knuckles. And oh man, like it all starts, I think, in like Lava Reef Zone, where suddenly you're like, oh, there it is in the background as I'm running along. There's the face, and as you get like further through the level, you see it gets bigger and bigger as you get closer to where its face is like crashed into the crater of where the mountain, the volcano is.
Yeah.
And then you think, hey, isn't it time for a boss? Flash!
Yeah, because Knuckles, like, you go out, you're like rising up, you're seeing the Death Egg, Knuckles, like, whacks a giant big rock at you. Big old gem, sends you flying down, you land down in this like what still chilled icy area, and then there's big old Death Egg eyes. Well, it's not gonna be icy for much longer. Yeah, fire, flames, Robotnik sending missiles after you. Oh, terrifying. And that's sort of like, it carries through Hidden Palace Zone, where again you see it in the background, and there's the whole Knuckles fight, but Robotnik betrayal, steals a Master Emerald. Oh well, I guess we'll just have to team together, go to Sky Sanctuary, there it is! Oh no!
Yeah.
Oh, it's so cool.
Iconic.
Man. I mean, you talked about like the story presentation in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, but I mean the hypest shit is the end of that Sky Sanctuary where they are running on that corkscrew platform, and then you hop to the Death Egg itself.
Yeah.
Yup.
Oh boy. Better get ready for some scary music and a scary level.
And we actually get a level this time. This is where, like, I feel like there were plans to have, like, an actual Death Egg level in Sonic 2, but, you know, space, time, all that sort of stuff. But now, there it is, a full spacey sci-fi level that sort of, like, establishes what a Death Egg level is going to be going forward. Oh, it's an interesting one.
Yeah, looking at Act 1, I'm sure I've made the connection in my head before, but just seeing it now, like a very Star Wars New Hope, where Obi-Wan has to turn the tractor beams off, like the big pillar in the background of Death Egg Act 1. Like I think I am definitely seeing the inspiration. It's so cool looking.
Yeah.
And then Act 2 is I can only imagine, like, if they pulled away, like, further, showed, like, you're climbing up, like, the outside of the Death Egg or somewhere.
Sonic doesn't need to breathe, it's fine.
No. I think, yes, that was established early on. Can't breathe underwater, but can breathe in space. It's okay.
And yeah, it just builds and builds, doesn't it? Like, by the time you get to the boss, and you get a boss, and it's just a weird one. But then you fight the boss, and that's
yes.
and like you think the last Death Egg robot was big. This guy, it's flipping huge. You can't even see all of him. He's off screen. I don't even know what he's standing on. He just hops into this giant mech suit that sneezes fire at you, and it's terrifying. The giant Eggman robot, I believe they call him. I just think he's scary.
Yeah,
Yep.
You're not even wrong.
It is so intimidating, and again, one of those that I did not manage to get to right away as a child, but I'm pretty sure there's a screenshot of it on the back of the box, and I would just, look at that longingly and be like, someday I'll have to face him.
My mountain, my Everest,
Yes, my white whale.
my big egg.
The Master Emerald powered big egg. Yeah, it's quite something.
Oh yeah, gosh, forgetting. I love that little detail of in the chase segment where you have to hit his nose to make him vulnerable, and you realize, like, oh my god, the Master Emerald's right inside that thing. Oh, it's so cool.
And then when you blow it up, there's pretty much the Death Egg gone because everything starts falling apart, and then it transitions to another thing. But by then, the Death Egg's gone, and man, woo, that's a lot.
That was it for a little while.
Why do I keep making load-bearing robots?
Yeah, you blow the robot, it's gone. Why does this keep happening? Just puts all of his eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
I don't get it.
Eggs. But for a long time, no Death Egg. Because, to be fair, once you do all that, it's like, well, that's it. You've done all that you can with it, right? But I just really like the Death Egg, and it was gone for a while. Until Sonic Battle. And then it's just kind of there. It's kind of funny because on the last, when you're playing Sonic Battle, to get into that a little bit, like the last level is suddenly the Death Egg, and it arrives with no fanfare, and to be fair, it doesn't really even look like the Death Egg. It's just kind of a space station, but they could have just made it like Eggman's final base, but they decided to just call it the Death Egg.
We have our a special section about the pseudo Death Eggs that are, definitely Death Eggs, but not in name.
Yeah, they're Death Egg adjacent.
Yes.
But this one is in name. It just doesn't really feel like the Death Egg, but it's there. It's in space, I guess.
I remember have not revisited the incredibly intricate, from what I remember, story mode of Sonic Battle, but
Oh yeah, that was gonna be a whole deal whenever we get around to it.
Yep. I remember, I do remember the Death Egg reveal, and even then it was just kind of like, oh, okay. it's the Death Egg.
Somehow the Death Egg returned.
Yes, that might as well be the official explanation every time.
And then it was gone again for a long time. Until Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing decided, hey, let's have a Death Egg level. They had the DLC track Egg Hanger, and that was cool.
This was so cool to me when it first, came out. Like, I remember At one point, I parked myself near the starting line just so I could see, like, I believe they had like the final boss from Sonic and Knuckles, the big ship thing you chase down with Supersonic, as like a thing in the background that would be like hovering around. I was like, oh, this is so cool.
That's so sick. Yeah, because what was there also not in one of the Sonic Drift games a track named the Death Egg that I guess.
There definitely was, as I recall.
Yeah, I mean, looking at a screenshot, it's like, well, this is not really anything Death Egg about it except the icon. But hey, just for the sake of completionship here on our discussion.
That is true. But this Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing one is, it's the Death Egg, all right. You don't see the actual ship itself in its entirety, but you just get to, you're zipping around on this little space station with the planet in the background. That's all you can ask for.
Man, that's a good racing game.
It is.
It is. Like, the sequel is obviously better, but it still holds up pretty well, all considered.
Just on the thinking back to all of the how good the fan service, the right out the gate, like the All-Stars line, like, you know, I think it technically started with the iToy collection on PS2.
With Sega Superstars,
yeah, and then you had what was it, Superstars Tennis as well, and then here comes All-Stars Racing, and man, good bunch of games.
It's very good. Like, Sumo clearly put a lot of love into this track. And also Ristar.
Yeah, yeah, that's right.
He is also there.
I mean, he's space adjacent, it makes sense.
A spacent.
Yes. And then no Death Egg again for a while. The Death Egg just sort of like appears for a while, disappears again, appears a while. And then Sonic Generations came out, and oh, Boise!
This was the start of the real Death Egg resurgence.
Because they were doing, like, reflections of, like, old levels, like, the whole point of Sonic Generations was, here's a little something from each of our standout mainline games. When they did the Sonic 3 section, Sonic 3 and Knuckles, we got a Sky Sanctuary, and if you're going to have Sky Sanctuary, you gots to have the Death Egg in the background, and there it was! It's big!
Looking cool.
and then again later, Sonic 2 boss battle shows him going into the Death Egg.
Yeah, that's where you fight the Death Egg robot again. A considerably chunkier version of the Death Egg robot, I have to say. Maybe a little bit sillier than the one I remember, and considerably easier. Like, good golly, it's over in minutes.
Yeah.
But it's fine.
I do remember I liked the kind of like the 3D gimmick in the Generations one, where like you are jumping on the big platforms instead of just on a flat 2D plane.
Yeah.
And seeing that big drill coming right towards you on the screen was really neat. And it is cool that this is the version of the Death Egg robot that sure seems to have inspired the Sonic 2 movie producers with their giant Eggman robot as well.
Yeah. Like, we didn't get I think we talked about it on the episode, but we didn't get the Death Egg in the Sonic 2 movie, but we got the Death Egg robot, which is kind of like a Death Egg robot, because it's just a giant robot that's like a Death Egg that Robotnik pilots.
Absolutely massive.
I'm still holding firm in my expectation that Sonic 3 will have Space Colony Arc and the Death Egg basically be, related in some way or another.
Yep.
I could see it.
Oh boy.
But yeah, Generations was the turning point, because now they actually have a 3D Death Egg model use for whatever they see fit. So all bets are off now.
It's a slightly different model because they've given him a mouth now, and I'm not always sure how I feel about the big grin, because I know it's reflecting his logo now, so now he's got the eyes, the nose, the moustache, and the mouth. But it does look a little bit funny sometimes from some angles. He's just staring down at you like, yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yes, but is it really any less silly than a face without a mouth staring down at you?
I don't know. I feel like there's part of me that's like, maybe the lack of mouth is kind of more intimidating. I have no mouth and I must scream, I guess.
I have no mouth and I must egg.
Yes.
The no mouth is definitely more judgy.
Yes. I'd say so.
I'm just imagining him like looking down at people like, is that what you're wearing?
Even comparing the the different versions of, you've got the Generations version, and then fast forward a little bit, the Forces version, the mounts are kind of a different shape. Like they get revised with each version too. Looking, the Generations is a more of a smile, like coming down, like you don't see any hint of an upper lip on that one. So he is more of a whereas the Forces version, it is a upside down, like half circle slice. You can kind of see.
Yeah, you're right. Now I look at it. Yeah,
yeah, a little bit.
That was good future, bad future.
Yeah. Every time he brings it back, there's just some slight edits, huh?
Yeah, Death Egg mood board.
I mean, it does check out. Sonic Generations had lots of people like, and Sonic Forces had people like,
Oh, he had to put the frowny face on it because, of course, the main function of the Death Egg in Forces is just for Sonic to be tortured for months.
Yeah, apparently.
I was tortured.
Off screen. It's worth pointing out, by the way, it was in Sonic Forces. It's just kind of, it plays up a role in the story. I suppose if Robotnik was going to take over, he's going to have a big egg in the sky to watch everyone, but it's mostly there as a prison. It's got like weapons on it and stuff, and they talk about like shutting down the weapons, and they blew it up, and at one point it's all Star Wars-y, but it's just kind of there.
It's probably the level I remember the most from Sonic Forces. It's pretty cool, but
yep.
You do get to do like a little Sonic 3 and Knuckles inspired like level, classic level as classic Sonic.
Mm-hmm.
So that's cool.
Yeah, and I do feel like the fake Death Star trench run you do like in QuickTime segments during modern Sonic's level is one of the more like memorable parts of that whole thing.
Yeah, I remember that looking really nice. The, I don't even know what you call it, but yes, it's the Star Wars trenches, and like the up close detail of like the Death Egg's skin, quote unquote, looks really cool in that game.
It's nice to point out the good things in Sonic Forces, and one of them is the Death Egg, because we like the Death Egg.
There you go.
Before we move on, it is worth talking about, we're going to talk about this in greater detail one day, I am sure. But it's worth talking about the LEGO Dimensions Sonic level pack that has the Death Egg again. There it is again.
Yeah, I believe it uses the exact same model as Generations. It's mostly kind of just for set dressing. The very last boss fight in the level there is you do a siege on the Death Egg, fight the Death Egg robot, and then fight Giant Chaos Zero like inside the hangar.
Oh,
but
that's right.
Yeah, but then it's also part of the like open world area where you can go in and do like a Death Egg inspired style kind of mini challenge thing. It's cool. Like I definitely will want to talk about that at some point because I was in way too deep.
Yes.
I said it before. I'm pretty sure you bought it for me. I still have it somewhere around here.
One of these days.
It's nice to see Death Egg as one of the representations in that game. Like, it's like they hit a lot of popular levels, and they were like, well, we've got to have the Death Egg in there, haven't we? And yeah, fair enough. But that essentially covers the Death Egg as we know it, under its actual name, within the Sonic games, the mainline Sonic games. But now I want to get into some more of an interesting topic. See, we've talked about how it is in Sonic, the official product. Let's talk about how it was in the comics, because it was given a chance to be expanded upon because, it's a story, an actual full story. And I think this is where a lot of my understanding for how scary the Death Egg is how it was represented in the comics. And when I say the comics, I mean Sonic the comic for me personally, but
Yes, I pretty sure I've said before, as someone who started reading Sonic the comic like fairly recently, that the Sonic 3 and Knuckles adaptation, which takes place over just under like a dozen issues, that is now like the ultimate like adaptation of that story. Mostly because, the ones in Archie Sonic aren't very good, and the ones that were going to be good never got to come out. But the one in STC is it's so freaking cool. And, doesn't it actually, kind of technically start with... Well,
technically speaking, if we get into it, there was an issue a long time ago where they like had Sonic go back to the Death Egg while it was still in space, because it was apparently. They would have to undo this because Sonic was essentially destroying the Death Egg all over again to send it hurtling, just to blow it up so that it wouldn't be there anymore. If they had not done that, they'd have been able to like transition to having it go back on to lead into Sonic 3, but alas.
In preparation for this episode, I actually, thanks to the help of Jeremy here, I got to read some of the STC comics for the Sonic 3 and Knuckles adaptation, and that first issue, it's in issue 45. Like, that's the simulation one, and that that got me like kind of like a little bit scared and like a little bit like holy crap, what are they doing? Because he like shoots gigantic lasers out of his eyes and he like vaporizes tails, and you see Sonic like getting vaporized, and then like the next page is like, what a fantastic simulation. I was like, all right, okay.
Yeah, now you know what it was like, Jake. For all of us, or us easily impressed. Us poor children reading that growing up, because Day of the Death Egg, I believe it was called, was just a nice little sort of like, hey, this is what the Death Egg can do, so let's hope it doesn't.
Yeah, that was definitely one of the things, is like, it informs the potential power of a Death Egg is, giant hero obliterating lasers.
And of course the design for Eggman and the STC it looks very similar to, if not completely similar, to the Adventures of Sonic Robotnik. So the whole time I'm hearing John Baldry, like his voice coming out of him saying these really like nasty lines and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's the sort of weird thing that we had to deal with, like, because obviously I'd watched the cartoon at the time, and then they decided, hey, we're going to make it look like the cartoon one, but also he's really, really evil in this one, so now you get to imagine evil Long John Baldry, and I'm kind of okay with that.
Yeah. Still rolling his R's and still being like very flamboyant.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, of course.
A bit of dissonance, but in kind of a way that you can really appreciate.
Yeah, I really love the design of the Death Egg in STC specifically, where it seems to be a little like tilted down compared to some of the other ones. Like looking at the panel of it launching, and the thrusters are coming off like the bottom, and the face is like, almost doing a version of like the Stanley Kubrick stare as it is launched into space.
I think it's a misunderstanding based on the Sonic and Knuckles title screen, where you see it going down face first into the volcano, so they didn't realize the face was on the upper half. It's like the misunderstanding Amy's design based on that piece of Sonic CD art all over again.
Yeah,
but I don't know, I quite like it like that.
Yes, and if it was an accident, it's a happy accident, because that design is aces. And I mean, I don't know what else to say other than to tell people to go read that whole arc, because it's so good. It is action packed.
The adaptation of Sonic 3 and Knuckles, it's not a direct one. It's not like perfect like to the games, but it is an amazing storyline, and it really gets the idea across that this thing is like, we had the impression in the games like, oh man, I really don't want this thing to be out there. I don't know what it's going to do, but it feels bad. And in this, they show you this is what will happen. Tails will get fucking annihilated. And that sort of stuck with me. That's sort of like, oh, that's what it can do. That's horrible. Horrible? It's horrifying and horrible at once. It's horrible.
Yes. On the opposite end of the spectrum, gosh, it's not, you were saying, oh yeah, STC's adaptation isn't, what we would call a one-to-one. Well, you know what isn't at all? The Sonic Quest miniseries that the Archie Sonic comics did back in the day, because they kind of painted themselves into a corner where they had already introduced, elements of the games at that time, including like Knuckles and the floating island, Angel Island, etc., but did not touch anything to actually do with the story of those games. So when the Death Egg came around, I wonder if that was a Sega thing or just an editorial thing where they were like, oh man, we didn't get to use that cool space station, huh? So they basically came up with their own story that I reread this just for fun and forgot that it is smack dab in the middle of the arc where they have rescued King Acorn from the zone of silence, but his skin is turning to crystal and they have no ideas on how to stop it. So they call everyone together and say, just go out looking for rings and emeralds and see if holding them up to my poor bastard king father will keep him from turning into a crystal man. I don't know what else to say, because it's basically like the death egg is there.
Yeah.
That's the best way of putting it. It's like the STC was like, okay, we're going to make sure there's a multi-part story arc that really gets into the events of Sonic and Knuckles and builds up the Death Egg as the real threat it is. And Archie's just like, oh, well, fine, we'll do a mini-series and we'll have the Death Egg in it, I guess, but I'm really more interested in what happens to King Acorn. Fine, there's the Death Egg, it's gone, bye.
Yeah, the fact that Jeffrey St. John, or Sinjin, whatever the his name is on the first page should be your clue into the what the real focus is going to be in this story. Now, to be fair, they do say what the Death Egg can do.
Yeah.
Robotnik says, like, I'm going to launch this into orbit and using the power of a Chaos Emerald and the Power Rings, I'm going to use it to roboticize the entire planet. But we never see that. And I mean, I think that's that is your contrast between STC doing the simulation story and actually showing the power of the Death Egg versus, we get like 4 pages of dialogue in these Archie specials where he just talks about what it can do.
He's just going up on his big egg, and Sniffly's in the meantime is just like, well, I don't care about that. I'm going to change Robotropolis to Snivopolis, and I'm going to get a massage.
I'm going to have all the SWAT bots give him a massage and prepared oil baths for him. I do like how the version in this Archie miniseries series is literally egg-shaped. Like, the ones from the games are pretty, they're circular, Death Star, it's a circle, but hey, it still counts as an egg. But yeah, this Archie version is literally shaped like an egg.
It's still a pretty scary rendering, I think. It's just slightly undermined as when you go into the cockpit, and there's Robotnik there with, like, fuzzy dice and a little 8-ball control stick that he's got.
Yes, we were still in the era of this is SatAM Robotnik, but he gets a little silly with it, compared to like his true SatAM counterpart. But I mean, the big things I remember from this, aside from the Death Egg, are that the giant Mecha Sonic from Sonic 2 shows up, and I believe they called him Silver Sonic in this adaptation as well. And that everyone kind of, this was also the weird era of the comics where everyone kind of talks the same, like, superhero dialogue. I remember it's really weird between Sonic and Tails, and I'm like, man, can you guys, I don't know, work out your personalities? That's just how it was back in the day.
Yep.
It was the style at the time.
Yeah. I mean, especially Tails, like, Tails at least is, compared to, like, SatAM and Adventures, like, he's part of the team. He plays, like, basically the second main character in the story, but, yeah. Now I feel like I'm talking too much about these damn Archie comics.
We'll get to that.
They'll have their time.
Yeah, we'll save that for another day.
So let's move on to another Archie comic. No, but really, what would happen later in the Archie comic? What issue did this happen again? I think it was like leading up to 250, wasn't it? Like 249 we first saw this.
It was definitely a later one, because I feel like I remember this popping up in like a free comic book day thing from pretty late in the game. Like, definitely pre-reboot, I remember that.
This is, it was pre-reboot, but this was like Ian Flynn being like a steady story arc building up to the revelation that, hey, the Death Egg is back, and this time we're taking it seriously. It's the Death Egg Mark II. What we got here is a really cool redesign. It's definitely like leans into it's an egg now, but it's terror. It's pretty horrible. I quite like the dead eyes that it's got, and the way, oh man. And the idea behind it is that, again, it's meant to roboticize all of the planet, and it's also like Robotnik's base going forward. Yeah, like Ian Flynn was just like, the Death Egg matters. Let's make it a big deal.
Yeah. I'm refreshing my memories on the whole storyline. But I mean, yes, this directly leads to, not only does this Death Egg contain the World Roboticizer, but this is also where he develops the reset button, which leads into our soft reboots and whatnot. Oh man.
Yeah, so I'm glad that Archie like got to grips with it eventually. It just took a very, very long time. I suppose that leads to like the most recent comic appearance of the Death Egg, and really recent.
It's most unusual as well, I think.
IDW's Scrapnik Island miniseries. Oh, that has a Death Egg in it. Not a functioning one, but it's there.
Man, it will still be I believe a few months out, but I know the trade paperback for Scrapnik is scheduled in August, and I highly recommend people pick that up or go read the individual ones, because yes, the Death Egg appears, and I almost don't want to talk too much about it, because woo, that is an excellent story arc. It's been one of my favorite things in a long time, just because it's so unique. It's a new spin on Sonic that you just don't really see that often in an official capacity. I will just say that the Death Egg in Scrapnik Island is super cool.
But that was just us mentioning it just so we did, because I'd love to elaborate on it a bit more, but next time.
Next time.
But that kind of covers the Death Egg as it is named. But there were like it would inspire other iterations, which is to say mostly rip-offs of the rip-off. So there would be other Death Eggs and offshoots. It kind of started with Sonic Blast, of all games. Not 3D Blast. We're talking about Blast on the Game Gear.
G-Sonic.
G-Sonic, as it would be called Japan. That's there is now the version of the Death Egg we have here is titled Silver Castle, but it's just a Death Egg basically.
Yeah.
It literally, if you watch like the rip-off of the Donkey Kong Country 2 ending sequence where it crashes, it's just the Death Egg falling to the sea from Sonic and Knuckles, essentially.
Or Mega Man X, or probably other games.
I mean, they've had a few that have had that. But it's just them saying, well, we need something like the Death Egg, I suppose. So it's Silver Castle. Anyway, Egg Utopia. That's Sonic Advance 2's version. Pretty Death Eggy. What does this one look like again?
If I was picking out the biggest differences, maybe the eyes look more like goggles than the, sunken in Death Star laser pits.
Yeah, there's not as much of a mustache.
And maybe compared, it's smaller by scale. But, that is definitely a Death Egg.
Level operates like one, so it might as well be. Got the upside down parts. I don't think we mentioned that, but yeah, there's the whole part in like Act 2 with the gravity, the reverse gravity in the Death Egg and Sonic and Knuckles, where you go upside down and you'd have to play the game upside down. And yeah, I think they do that in that one too.
And they carried that over into Forces along with the bridges that auto-generate as you run on them.
Yeah. And the little countdown machine goes whoop 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 whoop.
Oh man. That noise has haunted me for decades.
Following that is Deadline from Sonic Rush. Interesting design for this guy. Looks kind of like a football or a shell, I think. Now I look at it, it looks like a cartoony One Piece character with a big beard.
Oh yeah.
This is like if Eggman saw Grunkle Stan's balloon and was like, no!
Yes! What an idea!
Just another space level. There's quite a lot of those in Sonic ever since Death Egg. That's sort of set the standard for this kind of thing. So Space Station. It's alright. You get to fight Blaze there. Or Sonic if you're playing as Blaze.
It's also got maybe the catchiest song in all of Sonic Rush, What You Need.
Ooh, you ain't lying.
So, this is the Sonic Fighters version. This isn't actually in chronological release order, but I just wanted to talk about the Death Egg too. Sonic, we've talked. Have we talked about Sonic the Fighters? I think we have. Because
we did on the arcade episode.
A little bit.
Yeah, well, there it is. It's a silly thing.
Okay, I've don't think I've ever made this connection. Kind of looks like the amusement park from Sonic Colors.
Yeah,
the various satellites.
This is just silly, though.
I think Eggman got a little excessive with the satellites coming out of it, especially considering that you don't even go to any of them. It's just like...
Yeah. Is that supposed to be the mustache or those like little flippers? Man,
multi-purpose.
I mean, I can't see it as a mustache, but it's not on his face. It's coming out of his ears.
He really thought he was onto something with this, and then...
They're giant, like, solar panels or something.
It's growing on me the more I stare at it. It's goofy as hell.
Look at this silly thing. That's just where you fight Metal Sonic, which is... You know, this does actually technically follow the Death Egg, or like Sonic 2 order of you fight a Metal Sonic, and then you fight Robotnik, but Robotnik's battle is... It's not that bad. Metal Sonic, however, will give you a lot of trouble, and I think we talked about that before.
Yeah, Metal Sonic will mess you up. Robotnik isn't bad, but it also has a 30-second time limit. You've only got one shot.
Yeah.
Too bad you're not Supersonic, because good luck unlocking that in that game.
I've done it a couple of times by setting it to easy and setting the opponent's barriers to 1. Basically, just like trying to cheese it as much as possible to make it as easy on myself as I can. I'm looking at the close up here, and yeah, there is no mustache on this one.
His ears just kind of explode out. Hey, Eggman, what's in the big blue orb? That's where I keep all my fakes of you. Ah, and then what's in the big purple one? Big the cat. He needed a home.
He's a cool dude. You should be nicer to him.
He's really got his stuff figured out.
He's actually been to space a few times, so...
It does make me think that maybe in another... Oh, actually, no. The mustache is there. It's just, like, really sticking out of the sides. I feel like in another interpretation of this, we could have had a thing where, like, each of the satellites was its own arena, and then you would move to the center to confront Robotnik in, like, the very end of the arcade ladder or whatever.
Yeah. Instead, they decided to go with no, you've got to collect the 8 Chaos Emeralds first to power Tails' rocket ship to get there.
Yep.
Well, that's the Death Egg too. What a silly thing.
It is.
I suppose we might as well cover the EGG station, as if you want to pronounce it that way, from Sonic the Hedgehog 4.
Oh boy, this one stinks.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's another one I don't think we even get to see from the exterior.
No, it's just, I mean, it's just a shitty version of Sonic 2.
With a boss, like an actual boss rush where it makes you play at least versions of the ones you fought before.
Yeah.
They're not very good. We'll get to Sonic 4 properly one day, but it's just another... Yeah, this is a bad version of things we played before. You do fight a giant Robotnik mech. I forget what they call him. Just a Death Egg robot, apparently. Well, I mean, that's just what it says on here.
Yeah.
It has a few interesting attack patterns. It starts glitching out at one point, and it changes up the way it attacks you, because it's all, like, electric and stuff.
That's kind of like Episode 1's gimmick du jour is, you know, it's a boss you've already fought once before, but then it changes up the attack pattern from what you're used to in the second phase.
Yeah, that's about it.
Is it fun or good? Not really.
Especially if you're trying to get that untouchable achievement.
Oh boy.
We'll talk about that when we get to the next one.
By comparison, you know, I think we've said before, is Sonic 4 Episode 2 good? No, not really. But compared to Episode 1, it's a little better.
Yeah.
Including the Death Egg.
Death Egg Mark II, not to be confused with the Archie version. This one is based more directly on the Sonic Generations design of the Death Egg, but it's Vord the Little Planet.
It sure has.
I mean, it's got it in its big transparent belly. It's got the Little Planet in it as a power source. Alright, I don't know why, but it looks cool, I suppose.
I believe the plot explanation is basically similar to Sonic City, where Eggman wanted to harness the Little Planet and its, like, teleportation abilities and stuff to create a...
Teleportation, yeah. But yeah, you actually get a level around this, kind of. It's not much of a level. You it's basically a bunch of bosses again. You fight Metal Sonic and Robotnik, and then you do a little race with Metal Sonic, and it's cool. It's fine.
Yeah.
And then you do a final Robotnik fight that I tried to do so many times because I really wanted to unlock the Eggman costume for my Xbox Live avatar, and I never did, and I'm still bitter to this day. No, I will not be taking comments.
Yeah, it's just a big old egg heart. It's alright. That's kind of how I feel about Sonic 4 Episode 2. It's just like, yeah, it's alright.
Yeah. It's fine.
Tails is in it.
This aspect of it is okay.
I do like the purple glowing aura around it. It definitely helps sell it as a more menacing Death Egg than
It does at least give it a little more flavor compared to some of the other Death Eggs.
Yeah, I like how the big purple energy sheen is like shining in the eyeballs too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what? I was trying to think of what the EGG station reminded me of. It reminds me of that weird flying fortress thing from the second Pokemon movie.
God, it's been a while since I've watched that.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I can kind of think of it in my head, but you're pulling at a primal memory here. There is one other sort of Death Eggy thing that we need to talk about that's kind of the big one.
Yeah?
Right, so it's not a Death Egg. It's not a Robotnik creation. Well, okay, you know what?
Yes,
it's
is.
a Robotnik creation, but it's not an Eggman creation. We gotta talk about Space Colony Arc.
The Space Colony Arc.
It's very important.
Yes.
Perhaps crucially so.
It looks like a big Cocoa Puff, and then it explodes with a face.
I can't remember if I really connected the dots back in the day, but I do love the implication that it is possible that Dr. Eggman was inspired by his admiration of his grandfather of replicating the space station with the the Robotnik family visage in his own exploits.
There is such an opportunity to turn that subtext into text in that movie next year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or even not even in the movie. Like, that is something that Ian could easily slip into another egg memo in whatever happens after Forces.
Oh, yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I would be very surprised. I mean, considering the background of the Space Colony arc with its various government conspiracies and weapons and whatnot, like, do you think at the planning stage, like, there was a justification at the meeting over the blueprints is where high-ranking officials are like, looks a bit funny, isn't it? And Gerald Robotnik having to explain how every detail was necessary for the stability of the the satellite,
including the mustache, especially the mustache.
How do you expect this to stay afloat without stabilizers? But they look like it's not. We're getting nowhere. Just move on.
The mustache is the stabilizers.
Would you like to see the lizard I've made?
I call him Jojo.
I do. I love the Space Colony arc. Like, when I picture it in my mind, I do see the little small sequence in the second Sonic X opening where it's appears to be catching on fire, and it's just a cool little bit of animation.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's cool. I like the Space Colony arc. I like the implication that that's what inspired the Dr. Eggman to give it a shot himself, and it's got a big space laser.
It's got a different vibe to it to the Death Egg in many ways, because the Death Egg is like solely meant to cause mayhem and trouble, whereas the Space Colony arc had functions other than the destruction of humanity. But that is like a big part of the story, and that makes it kind of scary.
Destruction of another race.
Yeah. Oh man,
we're going to talk about that game one of these days.
Yeah, we'll have
you
to.
keep saying it like it's the sword of Damocles hanging above us.
We need to, or else we will never be free.
It's more like a gun of Damocles, I think.
A GUN.
That's true, actually.
That game had swords.
I sometimes forget.
And stop signs. pull out of the ground.
The stop sign of Damocles. Write down episode title.
Eventually, we will all have to stop. That's the reminder. But that pretty much covers all the depictions of the Death Egg and everything it inspired. So that's it, really. The Death Egg has a weird legacy. It just keeps coming back. Why?
I mean, I feel like the easy answer is because it's cool as hell.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's cool as hell, and they already have the assets made.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is why it's technically in Frontiers as well, on the cyberspace levels of Sky Sanctuary.
Exactly.
Oh, we've got it. Put it there.
It's iconic in Sonic's memories, too.
Yeah.
I mean, if I had the situation where I was facing a giant face in the sky, I'd probably remember that too. That would be a vivid memory for me. They're also the same for the Death Egg robot. Ever since they remade it in Sonic Generations, that's been coming back in various forms.
Yeah, like the biggest one being, the remodel they did of it in Sonic Forces to turn into the mass-produced model.
Mm-hmm. The faceless model.
Yeah. I actually really like those, and I mean we already touched on it, but is not the ultimate realization of that robot is the fact that a version of it made it into the live action movies as well.
Yeah. I was gonna I'm looking at my outline here, and I'm like, will we see it in future media? I'll be honest with you, probably.
Yeah.
I feel like that is sort of a foregone conclusion at this point.
Yeah, I mean, again, I love your theory, but I would be very surprised if, yes, it does not show up in the next live action Sonic movie. Like those, the folks making those really have shown their hand that, like, oh no, we like all this Sonic stuff too.
Yeah.
If we are allowed to, we are going to put it in the movies now.
Yep.
I think the ultimate thing to say has it become more than just a Star Wars ripoff? Because we got into that at the beginning as to where it stands, like, in terms of, like, the public consciousness, but, like, it was just the Death Star, but with Robotnik's face instead. But what is it now?
I definitely think it has transcended its obvious pop culture reference and become a Dr. Eggman signature. That yes, it always will just be the Death Star, but then kind of like we said at the beginning, like it's not like it's blowing up planets or
Yet.
Yes, yet. I think, like you said, the public consciousness, like, I'm not saying this to, like, denigrate any younger fans, but I really do wonder if there are some younger Sonic fans who, like, experienced the Death Egg before, like, even... Because, I mean, the Death Star ain't in those Star Wars prequels talking about, like, your certain ages of people. So I wonder if, yes, there is a more, a more of a pop culture separation now than just, it's the Death Star, but with Robotnik on it.
But it does for us, doesn't it? That's kind of what matters to us.
Yeah.
Like, for me, I was never, like I mentioned, I was never really a Star Wars kid, so I never really had that sort of fascination with those, that imagery. Sorry, even though we're doing this on May the 5th, just the day after May the 4th, Star Wars fans. But, yeah, for me, it was one of those things, and I think it's partly due to, like, the games it was in, and in Sonic the comic, that it sort of, like, rented a lot of space in my head as a kid. Like, sometimes I'd look up into the sky, and the two things I would sometimes imagine in the clouds is, oh, there's the floating island, and there's the Death Egg descending upon it like a star. Oh no! That's the kind of awe-inspiring imagery that I would just like to imagine sometimes, because we have morbid minds as children. It's like, yo, man, it's been really boring today. I'd love if a space weapon would descend from the skies to murder us all.
So I could pull out the Chaos Emeralds and become Super Chris and destroy it.
Yeah, essentially.
I mean, if I could be Super Jake and destroy it, I'd do that too.
For a moment, I suddenly imagined a super form for Chris Thorndike, and I was terrified.
We never got that.
And he still needs Sonic's help.
True. If one of the most iconic images in Sonic itself can be Super Sonic, which is,
Right.
then we can have the Death Egg be an iconic
Completely
piece of Sonic.
original concept.
Sorry, you're right.
Sun Wukong.
Yeah.
Sonic
Wukong.
Hi! Hey! Same brain.
Brought it all back around.
I think for like the uninitiated to Sonic, like somebody who's a newcomer and they see the Death Egg for the first time, they're probably going to think, oh yeah, the Star Wars thing. It looks like Star Wars. But like I mentioned earlier in the show, as a kid, I only saw it as that way once, and then I kind of was able to partition it as two separate things in my head afterward. And I think, I really do think that, especially with as many years as the Death Egg has under its belt, I think it really is kind of its own thing once you get past the first glance.
And that's kind of the thing with Sonic. Like, Sonic will borrow ideas from various other pieces of fiction all the time, including, like, other games as well, as taking a look at Sonic Frontiers. But when the Sonic games approach it with such, like, authenticity and taking it seriously enough and being like, no, this is actually the coolest thing ever, I don't care where it came from, then it doesn't really matter that much.
Now what happens?
Again. But the Death Egg is definitely a thing where they're like, yeah, maybe it's Star Wars, but it's also our own thing, and we think it's scary and cool, and yeah, the rest of us do too.
I think there is something to be said about taking, the many influences of the Sonic franchise, but now it is putting something through the Sonic conversion machine. Just makes it its own, like, cool little thing. Like, I mean, just thinking, I feel like it's come up on our last couple episodes, but the Metal Virus arc in IDW Sonic, like, I remember when we first got the whispers of that, I think the solicitations, and I immediately did think, like, oh, okay, so we're gonna do a zombies but Sonic, and I feel like we were getting to the very tail end of, like, Walking Dead fatigue as far as, like, pop culture goes. But then, like, going through that, I'm like, oh no, of course, this is the Sonic version of this. And I keep talking about how I love how the writing comes through on that, where this is like one of the hardest things Sonic the Hedgehog the person has gone through, and you literally have friends and foes alike, like, talking to Sonic and saying, like, man, I think you got to give up on this one. Like, you are, your worldview is not going to pull you, is not going to be the light at the end of the tunnel at this. And he keeps saying, no, it's going to be okay. I just think that's another great example of, yes, taking something that on paper is a well-worn influence or whatever, and managing to spin it into its own cool Sonic-y thing. Just like the Death Egg.
Yeah.
Yep. Although I also realize that if it does show up in movie 3, there's going to be a whole long sequence of Sonic just saying, like, you ripped off the Death Star, and just really digging deep into it.
I mean, this is a Sonic that watches movies, so...
Yeah, it sure does.
I feel like it'd be authentic if Sonic was the one who said that.
But Sonic's always gonna be inspired by other things. Like, the whole... Sonic himself is just like Yuji Naka playing World 1-1 from Mario over and over again, and being like, what if we did this really fast? So everything comes from something.
Yep.
This one's just a bit more blatant than some of those other things, but it's fine because I think it's cool.
Exactly. And if that is not the healthy philosophy of a Sonic fan, I don't know what is.
Yeah. We've got to have one healthy philosophy.
I even talk, like, with friends sometimes about, like, movies and stuff, and if you see enough movies, you're able to see, like, plot points happen ahead of time, and, like, you eventually realize there's not really much new or original under the sun, but it's all about execution, like, especially in STC.
Oh, I was gonna say, yeah, like in STC, the execution is important.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, Tails.
It's a simulation. But I mean, I think, like, I still stand by what I said earlier. Like, I think the Death Egg in its own canon is used better than the Death Star is used in its own canon.
Damn, take that, Star Wars. The only thing is we don't have, like, a partially destroyed version of the Death Egg in any of the media that we can destroy again. That would be cool. I always like that aspect of Star Wars, is seeing the broken down version of the Death Star. So, you know,
Scrapnik Island rises again.
Oh yeah, dang.
Yeah, that would be cool. Be cool to have like picturing how could you have like a level or some kind of stage in that. And I think it's just like Sonic and Shadow's last levels in Adventure 2, where you're like basically outside the whole time, but like here are big chunks of the colony. That would be pretty neat.
Yeah.
And since it's Robotnik's face, like with bits of it missing, that's like we do see that in Scrapnik Island, and that's pretty horrifying. Spooky, scary, or inspiring imagery is part of what makes the Death Egg cool.
Yes.
So, do more of that. But that brings us to the end of this episode, I think.
Yes, I think that's going to bring this episode crashing down into Angel Island for now. But as always, you can find us on our social medias. I'm Game Buddy, sometimes with a 123 around the internet, and on Twitter I am Great Job Jeremy. That's GR and the number 8.
And you can find me all over the Twittery, social media-y places, probably. Well, all the cool ones. As Falero, and that's Faulero.
Love that jingle, and I will say it every time. You can find me on the socials at RockTheJake, and you can find me on twitch.tv as Mr. RockTheJake.
And you can find me on Twitter at Cyberlink420.
And of course, and as always, a very special thanks to Amy Waters for the use of our theme song from the album Gotta Go Slow. Please check out more of her work on YouTube and Bandcamp and other social medias. And don't forget to also subscribe, review, share, and rate the podcast. All that stuff. Just believe it or not, it actually works in spreading the show out there and helping us get in front of more people. So thank you very much to everyone who does that. So on our next episode, I feel like we've made some veiled references to it even in this one. Y'all want to read some more comics?
Yeah.
No, I'm going to do it anyway.
Well, we are going to dive into the shallow pool of the closer to the beginning of the Archie comic Sonic series, but we're going to look at a couple of those 48-page specials, and gosh, I don't even know how to explain how exciting getting a double length issue special number 1 was back in the day. But we are going to take a look at the Super Sonic versus Hyper Knuckles special, and I think we're going to go ahead and throw in Mecha Madness in there.
Yeah, we
as
are.
Well.
Mecha Madness, one I actually own the physical of.
Oh,
yeah. I think I've got a beat up copy of Super Sonic versus Hyper Knuckles in here somewhere.
I think mine might be in my parents' attic somewhere. I don't know.
But these are, in fact, 2 specials that have their highlights. The highlights of which are instances of Sonic and Knuckles going at it.
Whoa.
Like that other podcast that's good.
Ooh, I love it.
And one of them uses his feet as feet.
Oh, that's true.
All right, well, until next time, I'm Game Buddy.
I'm Falero.
I'm RockTheJake.
And I'm Cyberlink, and please hold your breath against the harsh vacuum of space until you pass out from oxygen starvation. After that, you won't care.
This has been The Hill is Always Greener, and we'll see you on the other side.
Yeah, the tagline.